In Rise of Kingdoms, there are a ton of legendary commanders, and some are more important to attack than others. But today, instead of talking about which commanders you should attack, because I'm sure we all know by now, kill Zhulang and Herman, kill Liu Che, kill Nevsky. What about the commanders you should not attack? Commanders that you should ignore in your opponent's murderable. So today, I will be telling you my top commanders that you should not attack in Rise of Kingdoms, and why they should be ignored until your opponent's pretty much last march. So if you want to be able to get better trades by just changing your priority order, you want to stick around until the end of the video. Now let's start off today's video by going over what makes a commander bad to attack. What is a commander that you just wouldn't really bother, especially in a small murderable fight where you just completely ignore them? And the first thing you want to definitely ignore is someone with very high counterattack. I'm using Charles Martel as an example here. He does have extremely high counterattack, and he's kind of a commander you ignore, mainly because he's not a threat, but also because he has a lot of counterattack and he's a fairly tanky commander. He's not going to die in one skill cycle. If he wasn't as old as he is, he would definitely be one of the tankiest commanders in the game, and he used to be one of the tankiest commanders in the game. So ignoring commanders which are tanky is something you should always do, since they're just going to slow you down and allow your opponent's other marchers to deal more damage. Now, we don't really see many tanky commanders nowadays, though there are still a few, and that should be kept in mind. The other type of commander you want to ignore is someone who's mainly just there for DPS. They've really got no debuffs. They don't really have any amazing buffs. They don't have much support. They're a pure DPS commander. Henry is an example here. We'll talk about him a bit more later. He's purely a DPS commander. He's only got single target damage. He's not doing too much for your opponent's murderable. I mean, he's just taking less damage factor. He's really worth ignoring over some of the higher priorities, such as Herman Prime and Zhulang. So ignoring someone who's really only there for the DPS is a good move, especially if it's single target. So someone like Nebu might not be the biggest ignore, just because he is, yes, kind of pure DPS besides a small debuff, but he does have an AoE which will deal a lot more damage than just a little bit of a single target. So single target commanders are definitely a very big skip for most things. The last type of commander you would really skip, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the DPS thing, anyone that's mainly there just for a small debuff or a buff is someone that you can consider skipping. So if there are any commanders where you find that, yeah, they're not the most amazing in terms of doing anything really open field related besides a small buff or debuff, you can pretty much ignore them, as their damage is not going to be as important as some of your opponent's stronger marchers. So if there is any commanders who aren't dealing big debuffs, they're really only there for damage, or they're super tanky with high counterattack, they're 100% commanders that you do want to ignore. Now that being said, starting us off with the first type of commander, or the first commander you definitely want to ignore in the murderable, and like I said, I mentioned it before, it is Henry V. Henry is a commander who's only there for DPS, like we said before, and he doesn't really do anything besides that. His whole entire kit is about being tanky and dealing just single target damage, and usually he's going to be paired with a YSG, or maybe with a Boudica or Zhulang. And sometimes if he's with Zhuge, he can be a bit of a threat and you want to take him out. Most commonly though nowadays, I see Henry with YSG. And yes, YSG is a 5-target AoE circle commander, high DPS, but compared to some other marchers like Zhulang and Herman, Nevsky and Joan, Liu Che and William, or William Liu Che once he finally releases, you don't really care too much about that Henry YSG march. It's not a priority of yours. Targeting any Henry march the second you see a Henry primary makes almost no sense if you're in a murderable, like small murderable fight. Obviously in bigger murderable you can hit him and run, it's not going to make a big difference. But in a small fighting situation, Henry is pretty much just worth ignoring, since he's going to deal pretty high counterattack, he's got revenge damage factor. All of these things are not going to be very good for you, and it's just going to slow you down more as you try and kill that Henry march, and it's not really going to benefit you compared to destroying some of the other marchers who are more squishy and have more priority. So Henry, not really worth killing at all, and there's other marchers that should come before him. He's probably one of those last marchers that you would really target. The next kind of commander I would actually almost recommend skipping. If a Shirbanipal, once he ages a lot, I'm going to put it out there, right now he's kind of worth targeting because he has got a lot of damage factor. But once a Shirbanipal gets a bit more age under his belt, maybe a year or so from now, and I'm probably not going to make another video of like these for another year or year and a half, a Shirbanipal isn't a commander I would be targeting, purely because he is another commander similar to Henry, where he's only pure DPS. So Shirobani Pal has got nothing besides damage in his kit, and he's got things that give him more health, more defense, he's got normal damage reductions. He is actually a somewhat tanky commander. Not crazy tanky, but he is slightly tanky, and these things can make him, again, a little bit annoying to take out and a bit unnecessary. There is almost no reason out there, really, to attack a Shirobani Pal, since he's just going to be tanking through everything and causing you a few issues. So Shirobani Pal doesn't have too many things that are a big threat to you, and right now he's worth targeting purely for the pure damage factor, but once he reaches around Henry's age, I'd be skipping a Shirobani Pal on the open field and I wouldn't be targeting him, since A, there's definitely going to be more important commanders then, and B, his damage will not be nearly as meta. So Shirobani Pal, I would definitely not be targeting him in maybe a year or so from now. For now you can, but he's still not a #1 priority, which is why I did want to mention him. So that means Henry and a Shirobani Pal, I guess also a Nebu, but he's not really that important. So Henry and a Shirobani Pal, they're two archer commanders that if you see them, most commanders that they're paired with are worth skipping. Obviously, for Shirobani Pals with Herman Prime, I instantly attack that march. If it's with Zulang or Boudica, it's definitely worth attacking that march. But overall, if he's with any other commander, it's pretty much just worth ignoring him and going for some of the more powerful marches. Next up, we have a tried and true combo, and that's Paka and Harold. This march combination is just there to inflict pain on you and be a real pain in the butt, to be honest. So if you see a Paka and Harold on the field, ignore that march. Even if it's not in a murderable, like a small murderable situation, just ignore Paka and Harold. Swarming it is really only going to make your day worse. Harold has instant active skills which are just going to hit you. Pakal is made to be swarmed, especially if you see someone city popping with Pakal. Just ignore the march, walk away from that city, since you're just going to get a bad trade, and in the best case situation, you might get a 1-to-1 trade. Obviously, Pakal is not as common as he used to be. I think that we probably won't see a Pakal-like commander for a little while, but no matter what, I would just be ignoring any Pakals you see, since he's really only there to inflict agony onto you whenever you do attack him. So the simple solution, don't attack him. Even if he is attacking you, it's probably better just to run away than attacking him back, unless you're running a specific archer murder ball. Like when I had Boudica Prime and Zulang in my murder ball, it would do good against Paka Harold. But I know people who ran calves and infantry marches would get wrecked by Pakal's revenge damage and stuff like that. So with Pakal, even if he's attacking you, he does such little damage, it's worth just leaving the march alone and letting it do its own thing. So if you see Pakal and Harold, just ignore it, it's not worth attacking, and it's not going to get you any real value. Another type of march I would ignore is anything with healing, so Constantine and Richard. These commanders are doing literally no damage, they're just there to be tanks. I mean, Richard does have some small debuffs like a march speed reduction, and also he makes enemies deal less damage. I know that's a pretty big debuff, but a lot of commanders also do that nowadays. So really, Richard, another commander I'd ignore on a murder ball. He's very rare to see nowadays, but I thought I'd bring it up. And same thing with Constantine. Again, fairly rare, but it is worth bringing up. Other than that, when it comes to infantry, another type of commander I'd consider ignoring nowadays is Sargon. Sargon is putting a Ord effect onto you, which can be a little bit of a problem. And yes, he is really, really good with single target, but that's just about all he does. Most people don't run Sargon anyway, so he's not going to be a very big deal. But again, compared to some commanders with AoE like Liu Che, who are just really, really powerful, and especially like Herman Prime, Sargon's Ord debuff isn't as OP as it used to be, and his damage factor, while it's not too bad if he can get every single one to trigger, that's not always going to happen. So Sargon isn't a very high priority target. He's somewhat tanky. I'm pretty sure he's got a little bit of shield factor in there, so he's not really worth going for as a first target. Maybe as like a second or third in a person's murder ball, but really he isn't your go-to target, and there are commanders who I would rather target much before you do a Sargon. So he's mainly there just for a, yes, it's a good debuff, but compared to Herman Primes, it's not even close, and he's just there to deal some single target damage. So he's worth ignoring while you take out some of those stronger marches, like those CPOs, Liu Che's, Nevsky's, everything like that is going to come before you go for Sargon, and also Tarek, because Tarek is literally just a damage commander. He does have a rage reduction similar to Nebu, but Tarek's damage, while it used to be much, much better, isn't as meta, and when he's surrounded, he's dealing even more damage. So he's, again, another commander you would try and take out last. Keep in mind, though, you usually see Tarek with Sargon as a pairing nowadays, if you even do see a Sargon, so it's worth just pretty much ignoring both of these commanders until you've taken out your opponent's stronger marches. Next up, we have the cavalry commanders, and I know the first one is definitely going to shock a couple people, and it's because he's a bit of an exception to the rule, and that's Bellarus. Bellarus Prime is a commander that I would be ignoring on the open field, especially in a small murderable fight. And you might be saying, why on earth would you ignore a Bellarus Prime? He has an amazing debuff, which is really just going to start to shred you, and his damage factor is okay. I mean, that's the best way to put it. So the reason you ignore Bellarus is the way he deals more damage is through the number of marches that are going to be surrounding you. And yes, you can just take out Bellarus and cut the head off right there. But really, what's the point of killing a Bellarus when you can kill the marches which are making him stronger? It's really as simple as that. If you take out one march, he's already down 3% damage factor. Take out two, he's down another, basically 3%, so he's down 6%. And if you take out 3 marches, it's really just Bellarus by himself because he loses his whole entire expertise skill and it becomes completely useless. And at that point, he's just got a really average debuff on his active skills. So Bellarus, once you get rid of that primary expertise, he's completely useless. So if you can get rid of the opponent's other marches, you can ignore Bellarus and you'll be in a fine position. So Bellarus, while he does seem like a little bit of a priority target and he isn't the worst person to target, he wouldn't be my number one choice, purely for the fact that he is not going to be doing much damage, or at least buffing or debuffing you much, once your opponent really starts to run out of other marches. So taking out the other marches before you take out Bellarus is a good idea. And I know it's tempting to target Bellarus. He's a squishy commander. He's often paired with Hao Bing, who's another very squishy commander. But they're both single target. They both don't have really amazing debuffs. At least Bellarus doesn't once you take out other marches. And if it's a small, like 5v5 murderable situation, you're really wanting to get rid of every other march besides the Bellarus. And even in bigger ball situations, while Bellarus is good to target because you can get some really quick damage on him and get a good trade, the thing with Bellarus in a bigger ball is once your opponents start to wear down, especially the people who initially brought out that Bellarus, they're either going to have to refresh and bring their marches back out, or the Bellarus just isn't going to be as effective as it would have been. So getting rid of the other marches before you get rid of that Bellarus is the best way to fight in Rise of Kingdoms, in my opinion, at least against the Bellarus, since really as you kill your opponent's other marches, you're going to deal AoE to him. He's slowly going to get weaker, and it really is just a compounding effect. As the weaker he gets, the more damage you're going to deal to him, the less damage they're going to deal to you, and overall it is definitely better, in my opinion, to target him a little bit later. He definitely comes before things like a Henry, like I'd kill Bellarus before you start attacking Henry, but I wouldn't destroy him before you attack someone like Nevsky. I still think Nevsky and Joan are higher priority targets than a Bellarus, but Bellarus comes before any tanky commanders, he comes before a Paka and a Harold, he comes before high counterattack commanders, but he wouldn't be your first target, because I've heard a lot of people say they go for Bellarus first. In my opinion, it's not the best idea. Once again, it can work, but it is just what I've noticed, a slight micro optimization to attack everything before you attack that Bellarus, since he's going to get weaker the more marches that you manage to, well, take out. The next march, which I would also be pretty much ignoring, and this one is definitely not a surprise, it is Attila and Takeda. This march is pretty much just Paka and Harold, but Cavalry Edition, and I would just ignore it purely because, well, Attila Takeda is the king counterattack march nowadays. It's really the most used march, and it's an absolute pain to kill. If you do kill it, you're going to take usually a bad trade unless you've got a lot more marches. And even in a murderable situation where you're fighting with a 5v5 murderable, you can really ignore Attila because he's not going to do as much damage as long as he's not really being too surrounded. So ignoring Attila Takeda is actually a really good thing to do. And even though he might seem a bit threatening, oh, it's an Attila Takeda, it's dealing all these massive white numbers to me, it's got no active skill damage, and it's a fairly outdated march. Not completely outdated, just slightly. So in my opinion, I'd be ignoring that Attila Takeda. I'm sure most people can agree, especially if you see him city popping. Just ignore it, get away from that city, go somewhere else, because otherwise you're just going to take you're going to take a bad trade. So ignoring Attila Takeda, always a good thing to do, as he is one of those commanders, or at least one of those commander pairings, that can cause you a lot of hurt if you do try to attack them. Another march which I would be ignoring, and this one is again similar to that Bellarus. Why on earth would you ignore this march? It's Trajan, and while Trajan can be seen as free kills and is a really good buffing march, the reason you ignore him is similar to Bellarus. As you take out your opponent's other marches, Trajan is just going to become less and less effective. William is really the only buffing march I'd ever target just because he's dumb squishy, like he's super easy to take out. But Trajan and Bellarus, they're slightly more annoying to take out. They've either got a lot of march speed like Bellarus and can run away fast, or they're just newer and a little bit more tanky like Bellarus, or in Trajan's case, they're really tanky and annoying to take out, and their buffs will just become useless if your opponents run out of marches. Usually in a murderable situation, besides really tanky marches like a Richard, Trajan is your last thing you want to take out. He's super tanky. If you put him with Mulan, and especially her double relic, they've got massive skill damage reductions, and it's going to be very annoying to take that march out. And overall, it's not going to make the biggest impact if your opponent runs out of other marches. So Trajan, one of those commanders who I recommend attacking really towards the end of a murder ball, and I recommend going for those AoE commanders, those debuffing commanders, those main damage dealers, before you go for that Trajan. So one of those marches, again, where he looks like a very appetizing idea, someone you definitely want to attack really early on, get rid of those buffs. But since he's becoming a lot more outdated nowadays, his buffs aren't as necessary. Running 7 DPS marches is actually better than running a Trajan. It's been tested. So Trajan's in that position. If you do see him in a murder ball, I would just be ignoring him, since really he's kind of like a bit of a piss take, to be honest. You don't really need to attack him, since there are better and stronger commanders who will be inflicting a lot more pain over that Trajan. Now, the final thing I'm going to talk about is ranged commanders. I know that's going to be a little bit interesting and a bit of a hot topic here, and I'm not 100% certain here, but from what I can say in theory, because I haven't seen very much ranged combat, ranged commanders are in a bit of a situation where you've got two options with them. You either take them out first, or you take them out last. And it comes down to a very simple reason of, if you're close to the ranged commanders, you probably want to take them out first, because they're not going to be taking nearly as much counterattack as your opponent's other marchers. So if they've set up a ranged tower and you're fighting pretty much on top of it, I take out that ranged commander towards the start of the fight, because they can start to become a little bit of a problem, especially with how good their trade could be if your opponent does get away, and you'll just notice that the range march completely destroys you. But if your opponent has left their range march much further back, honestly, I'd recommend taking it out pretty much at the actual end of the murder ball, the literal last march, because your opponents can't really run away in time. If you're able to get some good timing and you've got maybe a fast cav march left, you can kill off a range march relatively easily. By the time they try and get out of the tower and run away with the very slow siege units, you're going to hit them and you're going to get a ton of skill cycles off, and it's going to ruin the trade of the siege march. Siege marches always look like they trade good when they're hyper inflated, but the second you're able to actually hit them, especially if they're out of their tower mode, you're going to get a really good trade. So in a normal 5v5 murder ball or 7v7, whatever it may be, range marches are something you attack towards the end. Even in bigger murder balls, often you'll need to take out the actual murder ball before you go for those range marches, as they're set up on the other side. So range marches, they're always attacked towards the end. I don't recommend diving into a murder ball to kill them. I don't recommend going through enemy lines to take them out. You want to get rid of those main enemy marches first before you go for the range marches. Yes, some of the range marches nowadays, they do some AoE, which is definitely interesting. Some of them have things such as a disarm effect, which are obviously not the most overpowered. It is only 1 second, but it is still a disarm effect, and it can be a little bit annoying, but they are not your target priorities, and there are, again, more important commanders like Zulang, like Nevsky, like Little Chair, who are going to just inflict more pain if you don't get rid of them quick enough. And again, range commanders, they can't escape unless the person who's using them is really good at it. So unless you're fighting Mr. Siege, I wouldn't bother really going for those ranged commanders, since you'll have better options to target, and they are not really going to go anywhere just because they are super slow. So now that we've made it to the end of today's video, I'm going to ask you guys that if you enjoyed the video, to consider joining my Rise of Kingdoms Discord. The Discord server is really the best place to ask any questions, whether it be, what are the best commanders to target? Because I didn't really talk about that today. Is this commander worth targeting? Should I invest in this commander? If you have questions about your equipment, whatever it may be, my Discord server is pretty much the best place to do it. And we have, I think, 800 members now. So if you have any questions, I'm always active there. I respond to pretty much anything. If I'm pinged, I respond within literally a day. So consider joining the Discord. The link will be in the pinned comment and also in the description. And trust me, you guys won't regret it. And if you don't like it, you can always leave. Plus, it also supports me because I want to make a massive Rise of Kingdoms Discord. Now, I just want to say, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.